Close your eyes and let your mind drift backward through time, through the turning of countless seasons, through the rise and fall of civilizations, until you find yourself standing on the banks of a river that has flowed for millions of years. The Nile stretches before you, its waters catching the last golden rays of a sun that seems to burn with ancient fire. And in this moment, you are witnessing the birthplace of one of humanity's most enduring and mysterious mythologies. Here, where the desert meets the life-giving waters, where palm trees cast long shadows across fertile black soil, the ancient Egyptians looked up at the star-filled sky and saw not merely points of light, but the eternal drama of gods and goddesses, of creation and destruction, of death and rebirth. They watched the sun rise each morning from the eastern horizon and understood it as the victory of order over chaos, of light over darkness, of hope over despair. The air here carries the scent of papyrus and lotus blossoms, the distant sound of temple bells ringing across the water, and if you listen carefully, you might hear the whispered prayers of priests conducting their eternal rituals, keeping the cosmic balance intact through their devotion and ceremony. This is a land where mythology was not simply stories told around fires, but living truth that governed every aspect of existence, from the flooding of the Nile to the coronation of pharaohs, from the construction of pyramids to the preparation for the afterlife. The ancient Egyptians understood something that modern humanity has perhaps forgotten, that the universe is not a cold, mechanical system, but a living tapestry of divine forces, constantly interacting, constantly creating and destroying, and creating again. They saw in the natural world around them the manifestation of cosmic truths, and they developed a mythology so rich and complex that it would influence cultures across the Mediterranean and beyond for thousands of years. Tonight, as you settle into comfort and let the gentle rhythm of these ancient stories carry you toward peaceful rest, you are joining a tradition that stretches back more than 5,000 years, connecting your dreams to the dreams of countless generations who found solace and wonder in these tales of gods who walked among mortals, of love that conquered death, and of the eternal cycle that governs all existence. Before all things, before the first sunrise painted the sky with color, before the first flower bloomed or the first bird sang, there was only none, the primeval waters that stretched endlessly in all directions, dark and silent, and full of infinite possibility. Imagine, if you can, this vast ocean of nothingness, not empty, but pregnant with everything that would ever exist. A cosmic womb where potential floated like dreams, waiting to be born. In this boundless sea of darkness, something stirred. The Egyptians called it Adam, the self-created one, the God who brought himself into being through the sheer force of will and consciousness. Picture this moment of cosmic awakening, when the first thought formed in the void, when awareness sparked like a flame in the endless night, and suddenly there was something where before there had been nothing at all. Adam rose from the waters of none like a golden mound emerging from floodwaters, creating the first solid ground in a universe that had known only liquid darkness. He was complete unto himself, containing within his divine essence both male and female principles, the power to create without need of another. Standing alone on his self-made island in the cosmic sea, Adam began the great work of creation that would unfold across eons. From his own substance, through an act of divine self-love and creative force, Adam brought forth his first children. Shu, the god of air and wind, emerged as Adam's breath made manifest, carrying within himself the power to separate and divide, to create space between earth and sky. Alongside Shu came Tefnut, goddess of moisture and rain, the life-giving waters that would nourish all creation, her tears becoming the rivers and her breath the morning dew. These first children of creation were not born as mortals are born, but materialized from the divine essence of their Father, stepping forth fully formed into a universe that was still taking shape around them. Shu, tall and powerful, his arms stretched upward to support the weight of heaven, became the atmosphere itself, the invisible force that allows birds to fly and voices to carry across distances. Tefnut, graceful and nurturing, her body flowing like water itself, became the moisture that makes life possible, the gentleness that balances her brother's strength. But the cosmos was not yet complete, for Shu and Tefnut, wandering in the vast darkness, became lost to their father. Adam, in his grief and longing to be reunited with his children, removed his own eye and sent it forth to search the primeval waters. This divine eye, blazing with the light of consciousness itself, illuminated the darkness for the first time, becoming the prototype for the sun that would later bring light to the world. When the eye returned, bringing Shu and Tefnut safely home to their father, Adam wept with joy, and his tears, falling upon the newly created earth, became the first human beings. Thus, humanity was born, not from clay or breath, but from the tears of divine happiness, from the overflow of cosmic love and reunion. This creation story from Heliopolis was only one of several that the ancient Egyptians preserved, for they understood that truth is too vast and complex to be contained within a single narrative. In the great temple city of Memphis, priests told of Ptah, the divine craftsman, who created the world not through physical acts, but through the power of speech and thought. By speaking the names of all things, Ptah brought them into existence, his voice reverberating through the void like thunder, each word becoming a star, a mountain, a living creature. In Hermopolis, the city of Thoth, wise scribes preserved the mystery of the Ogdoad, 8 primordial deities who emerged from the chaos as 4 pairs of complementary forces. Nun and Nonnet represented the primeval waters, Hay and Howit, the infinite expanse of space, Kak and Kaukit, the primordial darkness, and Amen and Amonit, the hidden, unknowable mystery that underlies all existence. These 8 gods, sometimes depicted as frogs and serpents dwelling in the marsh of creation, came together in a cosmic dance that generated the cosmic egg from which the sun god would eventually emerge. Each of these creation myths carried within it profound truths about the nature of existence, about the interplay between order and chaos, consciousness and matter, the known and the unknowable. The ancient Egyptians did not see these different stories as contradictory, but as different facets of a truth too vast for human comprehension, like different colored lights combining to create the pure radiance of the sun. As creation continued to unfold, the cosmic forces began to take on more defined personalities and relationships, weaving together the great tapestry of divine interaction that would govern both heaven and earth. The gentle lapping of primeval waters against the shores of consciousness had given way to the complex dance of gods and goddesses, each playing their eternal roles in the cosmic drama. From the union of Shu, the god of air, and Tefnut, the goddess of moisture, were born to children who would embody the fundamental duality of existence itself. Geb, the earth god, lay stretched across the bottom of creation like a great green man whose body formed mountains and valleys, whose laughter caused earthquakes, and whose breathing created the gentle rise and fall of hills. His skin was the fertile soil of the Nile delta, rich and dark and full of life, and from his flesh grew all the plants and trees that would sustain humanity. Above him, arching across the vast expanse of sky, lay his sister wife, Nut, the goddess of heaven. Her star-spangled body, forming the celestial dome that protects and embraces the earth below. Her skin was the deep blue of twilight, dotted with countless stars that were said to be her children, and each evening she would swallow the sun, carrying it through her body during the hours of darkness, until she gave birth to it again at dawn. The love between Geb and Nut was so intense, so all-consuming, that they remained locked in eternal embrace, their bodies pressed together so tightly that there was no space between earth and sky for life to flourish. The universe remained cramped and airless, with no room for the plants to grow, or birds to fly, or human beings to stand upright and gaze at the stars. Recognizing that creation could not continue under these conditions, Ra, the great sun god who had emerged from the cosmic egg, commanded Shu to separate his children. With great reluctance, for he understood the pain he was about to cause, Shu placed himself between his son and daughter, his powerful arms pushing against Nut's belly, his shoulders bearing the weight of the entire sky, as he slowly, gently, but inexorably forced the lovers apart. The separation was agonizing for both Geb and Nut, and their cries of longing echoed across the newly created space between earth and heaven. Geb's tears became the oceans and rivers, while Nut's sorrow fell as rain, nourishing the earth with her sadness. Even today, this cosmic longing continues, for each evening Nut bends down to kiss the earth, and each morning Geb reaches upward, trying to touch his beloved, creating the mists and morning dew that herald the dawn. But their love was not entirely thwarted, for during the brief moments of twilight and dawn, when the boundary between day and night grows thin, Geb and Nut can touch, and from these fleeting unions would come some of the most important gods in the Egyptian pantheon. Their children would embody the complex relationships between earth and sky, between the physical and spiritual realms, between life and death. Shu, standing eternally between his children, became more than just the god of air. He was the principle of separation that makes all existence possible, the space that allows for movement and growth and change. Without his intervention, the universe would have remained a static embrace, beautiful but sterile. Through his sacrifice, accepting the burden of holding up the sky for all eternity, Shu enabled the great drama of existence to unfold. The ancient Egyptians saw in this myth not just an explanation for the physical structure of the cosmos, but a profound meditation on the nature of love and sacrifice, separation and unity. They understood that creation requires both union and division, that life emerges from the tension between opposing forces, and that even the gods must sometimes accept painful responsibilities for the greater good of all existence. In their daily lives, as they watched the sun rise and set, as they felt the wind blow across the desert and the rain fall on their fields, they were witnessing the eternal drama of this divine family, feeling the presence of Geb beneath their feet and Nut above their heads, breathing the very essence of Shu with every breath they took. From this cosmic family, locked in their eternal dance of separation and longing, would come the gods and goddesses who would most directly touch the lives of mortals, who would teach humanity about justice and love, about death and resurrection, about the delicate balance that maintains order in both the heavens and the earth. Among the children born to Geb and Nut, during those brief moments when earth and sky could touch, none would be more beloved or more central to Egyptian mythology than Osiris, the god who would become the archetypal king, the lord of the underworld, and the promise of eternal life for all who followed in his path. Osiris emerged into the world as the embodiment of everything good and noble in kingship. His skin the green of growing plants, his bearing regal and gentle, his wisdom vast as the Nile itself. When he assumed the throne of Egypt, the land flourished as never before. The Nile rose and fell in perfect rhythm. The harvests were abundant, and peace reigned throughout the kingdom. Under his rule, humanity learned the arts of civilization: agriculture, brewing, mining, and music. He taught them to worship the gods with proper reverence, and to live together in harmony and justice. Beside him ruled his sister wife Isis, whose name means throne, for she was the divine seat upon which all legitimate authority rested. Beautiful beyond description, wise beyond measure, and possessed of magical powers that could heal the sick and raise the dead, Isis was the perfect complement to her husband's kingship. Together, they represented the ideal of divine rule, where power was tempered by wisdom and strength was balanced by compassion. But in the perfect order of their kingdom lurked a shadow, for among the children of Geb and Nut was Set, the god of chaos and storms, of the desert wind and the raging tempest. Where Osiris was green and growing, Set was red like the barren sand. Where Osiris brought order and harmony, Set embodied the wild, destructive forces that could sweep away civilization in a single night. His very presence was a reminder that chaos always lurks at the edges of order, waiting for its chance to break free. Set's jealousy of his brother grew like a poison in his heart, fed by whispers from the dark places of the world and nurtured by his own twisted nature. He could not bear to see Osiris praised and loved, while he was feared and shunned. The prosperity of Egypt under Osiris's rule only deepened Set's resentment for it, seemed to prove that creation favored his brother over him, that in the cosmic order he would always be the outsider, the force of disruption rather than harmony. The plot that Set devised was as cunning as it was cruel. He commissioned a beautiful chest, crafted by the finest artisans in the land, decorated with precious stones and inlaid with gold, shaped precisely to fit Osiris's body, though none but Set knew this secret. At a great feast attended by all the gods, Set presented the chest as a gift, announcing that whoever could fit inside it perfectly would be allowed to keep it. One by one, the gods tried to fit themselves into the chest, but it was either too long or too short, too wide or too narrow for each of them. Finally, amidst laughter and encouragement from the assembled company, Osiris stepped forward to try his luck. The moment he lay down inside the chest, Set's conspirators rushed forward, slamming the lid shut and sealing it with molten lead, while Osiris, trapped inside, slowly suffocated in the darkness. The sealed chest was hurled into the Nile, where it was caught by the current and carried far downstream, disappearing into the marshes of the delta and then out into the great sea beyond. With Osiris gone, Set claimed the throne of Egypt, and immediately the land began to suffer. The Nile's floods became erratic, the harvests failed, and warfare broke out between the provinces. The Golden Age had ended, and humanity learned for the first time the bitter taste of tyranny and want. But Isis, whose love for her husband transcended even death itself, refused to accept this tragedy as final. cutting off her hair in mourning. Donning the simple garments of a peasant woman, she began a desperate search that would take her to the ends of the earth, like a lost soul wandering between the world of the living and the dead. She followed every rumor, pursued every hint that might lead her to Osiris's body. Her search led her far from Egypt, across the Mediterranean to the Phoenician city of Byblus, where she learned that a beautiful tree had grown up around a chest that had washed ashore. The king of Byblus, marveling at the tree's rapid growth and sweet fragrance, had cut it down and used it as a pillar in his palace, unknowing that within its trunk lay the body of the Lord of Egypt. Disguising herself as a humble nursemaid, Isis entered the palace and gradually won the trust of the royal family through her gentleness and wisdom. Each night, when she was alone with the infant prince she was hired to care for, she would transform into her divine form and attempt to make the child immortal by burning away his mortal flesh in sacred fire, while she herself took the form of a swallow and flew mournfully around the pillar that contained her husband's body. When the queen discovered this nighttime ritual and cried out in alarm, breaking the spell, Isis revealed her true identity and begged for the return of her husband's body. The king and queen, awed by the presence of the goddess and moved by her devotion, gladly surrendered the pillar, and Isis carefully extracted Osiris's body from the aromatic wood that had preserved it. But her trials were far from over, for on her journey back to Egypt, Isis was forced to hide the body in the marshy delta while she went to gather magical herbs needed for the resurrection ritual. Set, hunting in the marshes by moonlight, discovered the hidden corpse and in his rage tore it into 14 pieces, scattering them across the length and breadth of Egypt, so that Osiris could never be made whole again. Undaunted by this new catastrophe, Isis once again began her patient search, now aided by her sister Nephthys, the wife of Set, whose own conscience had been awakened by the magnitude of her husband's crime. Together, the two goddesses combed every corner of Egypt, and one by one they found the scattered pieces of Osiris's body, each fragment becoming a site of pilgrimage and worship for generations to come. When they had recovered all but one piece, which had been devoured by fish in the Nile and could never be recovered, Isis used her magical powers to fashion a replacement from clay and spells. Then, with Nephthys holding Osiris's feet and Isis at his head, the two sisters began the ritual that would transform death itself through the long hours of the night. Isis chanted the sacred words that she had learned from Thoth, the god of wisdom and magic. She breathed the breath of life into Osiris's nostrils. She used her wings to fan the spark of existence back into his still heart, and slowly, gradually, the green returned to his skin and awareness returned to his eyes. But the resurrection was not complete in the way that mortals understand life, for Osiris had been transformed by his journey through death into something new and different. No longer could he rule among the living, for he had become the Lord of the dead, the king of the underworld, the judge who would weigh the hearts of all who passed beyond the veil of mortality. His kingdom was no longer the black soil of Egypt, but the eternal realm where souls would find rest and renewal before beginning their next stage of existence. But before he departed for his new kingdom, Osiris was able to unite one last time with Isis, and from their love was conceived Horus, the child who would grow up to challenge Set and restore order to the world. Isis, knowing that Set would try to kill the child if he learned of his existence, hid herself in the deepest marshes of the delta where she gave birth to Horus in secret and raised him in hiding, teaching him the arts of war and kingship while protecting him with her magic from all who would do him harm. The story of Horus's childhood is filled with dangers and narrow escapes. 4 Set spies were everywhere, and the god of chaos knew that somewhere in Egypt a child was growing who represented a threat to his tyrannical rule. Scorpions sent by Set were turned away by Isis's spells. Crocodiles became protectors rather than predators, and the very reeds of the marsh formed a living shield around the mother and child. When Horus reached manhood, he emerged from the marshes to claim his rightful inheritance, and the great battle between order and chaos, between the legitimate heir and the usurper, began in earnest. Their conflict would rage across Egypt and through the heavens themselves, a cosmic struggle that embodied humanity's eternal fight against the forces that would destroy civilization and return the world to primordial chaos. The battles between Horus and Set were legendary in their ferocity and scope, ranging from single combat to vast engagements that shook the foundations of heaven and earth. Sometimes Horus appeared as a great falcon, his wings blotting out the sun as he swooped down upon his enemy. Sometimes Set took the form of a hippopotamus or a crocodile, creatures of the river that could drag even gods down into the watery depths. In one famous encounter, Set tore out Horus's eye, the symbol of his power and divine authority, but Thoth, the god of wisdom, restored it with magic, making it even more powerful than before. This restored eye, the Wedget, or Eye of Horus, became one of the most important symbols in Egyptian culture, representing healing, protection, and the triumph of good over evil. The conflict seemed as though it might continue forever, for both combatants were gods, possessed of supernatural strength and cunning, each representing fundamental forces in the cosmos that could never be entirely defeated. But finally, the other gods, weary of the destruction and chaos that the war was causing, convened a great tribunal to settle the matter once and for all. Before this divine court, with Ra himself presiding as judge, both Horus and Set presented their claims to the throne of Egypt. Set argued that his strength and power made him the natural ruler, that in a world where might often determines right, the strongest should lead. Horus countered that legitimacy comes not from power alone, but from justice, wisdom, and the proper order of succession, that he was the rightful heir of Osiris, and that Set's rule was based on murder and treachery. The trial was long and complex, with many of the gods taking sides and presenting arguments. Some favored Set, seeing in his raw power the strength needed to hold back the forces of chaos that constantly threatened creation. Others supported Horus, believing that only legitimate authority, based on justice and wisdom, could create the stable foundation that civilization required. In the end, it was the testimony of Osiris himself, speaking from his throne in the underworld, that tipped the balance. The Lord of the Dead declared that Horus was his true heir, that justice demanded the restoration of the rightful line, and that Egypt would never know peace or prosperity under the rule of a usurper, no matter how powerful. The gods rendered their verdict in favor of Horus, but rather than simply banishing Set, they found a way to harness his chaotic energy for the good of creation. Set was given dominion over the desert and the storm, becoming the guardian of Ra's solar boat during its nightly journey through the underworld, where his strength and ferocity were needed to battle the serpent Apophis, the embodiment of primordial chaos that sought to devour the sun and return the world to darkness. With Horus restored to the throne, Egypt entered a new golden age, but one tempered by the wisdom that comes from suffering and loss. The young pharaoh ruled with the strength of his divine father and the wisdom of his divine mother, and under his guidance, humanity learned not just to live in harmony with the natural order, but to understand that order and chaos, life and death, joy and sorrow are all part of a greater pattern that gives meaning to existence. The myth of Osiris, Isis, and Horus became the central story of Egyptian religion, for it contained within its dramatic arc all the great themes that concerned ancient people: the problem of evil, the mystery of death, the hope of resurrection, the nature of justice, and the possibility of triumph over seemingly impossible odds. Every pharaoh who ruled Egypt was seen as a living embodiment of Horus, while every dead king became Osiris, ruling in the afterlife and preparing to be reborn. But more than that, the story offered hope to ordinary people, for it showed that love could conquer death, that justice would ultimately prevail over oppression, and that even the most terrible tragedies could be transformed into sources of strength and renewal. In the figure of Isis, they saw the devoted wife and mother who would stop at nothing to protect her family, while in Osiris they found the promise that death was not an ending but a transformation, a passage to a new kind of existence. As the story of the divine family settled into the collective memory of Egypt, becoming the foundation for countless rituals, festivals, and personal devotions, the ancient people turned their attention to understanding the great mystery that lay at the heart of their religion. What happened to the soul after death, and how could one prepare for the journey that every mortal must eventually undertake? The Egyptians called the realm of the dead the Duat, and they envisioned it not as a static place of punishment or reward, but as a complex landscape through which the soul must travel, facing challenges and tests that would determine its ultimate fate. This was not the gloomy underworld of other mythologies, but a place of wonder and terror, of beauty and danger, where the deceased would undertake a journey that mirrored the nightly voyage of Ra through the darkness. Imagine, if you can, the moment when the soul, freed from its earthly body, finds itself standing at the threshold of this mysterious realm. The transition from life to death was understood not as an ending, but as a birth into a new kind of existence, like emerging from the womb of mortality into the larger cosmos beyond. But just as physical birth requires struggle and effort, so too did spiritual birth demand courage, wisdom, and preparation. The entrance to the Duhat was guarded by fearsome beings whose task was not to keep souls out, but to ensure that only those who were properly prepared could pass through safely. These guardians, with their animal heads and gleaming weapons, their riddles and challenges, represented the first test that the deceased must face. Did they possess the knowledge and moral strength necessary for the journey ahead? Those who passed the initial guardians found themselves in a landscape that defied earthly logic, where rivers flowed upward, where the sky might be beneath their feet, and where the very air shimmered with magic and possibility. This was a realm where thought became reality, where the symbols and spells that the deceased had learned in life took on concrete form and power. The journey through the Duat followed the path of Ra-'s solar boat as it traveled from west to east during the hours of darkness, carrying the sun through death toward rebirth. The deceased soul could join this divine procession, but only if it could prove its worth through a series of trials that tested every aspect of its character and preparation. In the first hour of night, the soul entered the region where the recently dead were still learning to navigate their new existence, guided by friendly spirits who had made the journey before them. Here, the landscape was still somewhat familiar, resembling the Egypt they had known in life, but touched with an otherworldly quality that made everything seem more vivid, more significant than it had appeared to mortal eyes. As the journey progressed deeper into the night, the challenges became more severe and the landscape more fantastic. In the second and third hours, the soul passed through regions where the enemies of Ra dwelt, where serpents of darkness coiled around the path and tried to prevent the sun's passage. Here, the deceased learned to speak the names of power that would compel these creatures to step aside, demonstrating their mastery of the magical knowledge that was essential for survival in the spirit world. The fourth and fifth hours brought the traveler to the realm of Sokar, the ancient god of the necropolis, where the path led through caverns filled with fire and regions of such utter darkness that even the light of Ra-'s boat could barely penetrate the gloom. This was the deepest part of the underworld journey, the point furthest from the light of the living world, where the soul experienced the full reality of death and separation before beginning its journey back toward renewal. In the sixth hour, the soul reached the most critical point of the entire journey, the Hall of Two Truths, where Osiris sat in judgment, surrounded by 42 divine assessors, who would examine every aspect of the deceased's earthly life. This was not a courtroom in any mortal sense, but a place where the very essence of the soul was weighed and measured against the fundamental principles of cosmic order. The centerpiece of this divine tribunal was the famous weighing of the heart, conducted by Anubis, the jackal-headed god of mummification and the protector of the dead. The heart of the deceased, which the Egyptians believed to be the seat of consciousness and moral character, was placed on one side of a great scale, while on the other side sat a feather, the symbol of Mat, the goddess of truth and justice. If the heart was light, unburdened by the weight of sin and selfishness, it would balance perfectly with the feather, proving that the deceased had lived according to the principles of Mat and was worthy to continue the journey toward eternal life. But if the heart was heavy with wrongdoing, weighed down by cruelty, dishonesty, or neglect of duty, it would tip the scales and reveal the soul's unworthiness. Standing nearby, her jaws gaping wide in anticipation, was Apep, the devourer of hearts, a creature with the head of a crocodile, the torso of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus. For those whose hearts failed the test, Apep would consume not just the heart, but the entire soul, causing what the Egyptians called the second death, the complete annihilation of the person's existence. But this judgment was not arbitrary or capricious, for the deceased had the opportunity to defend themselves through the negative confession, a detailed declaration of innocence in which they listed all the sins they had not committed during their earthly life. "I have not killed," they would declare. "I have not stolen. I have not told lies. I have not been cruel to animals. I have not polluted the water. I have not been arrogant," and so on, through 42 separate declarations that covered every aspect of moral behavior. This was not mere legal procedure, but a profound examination of conscience, a moment when the soul came face to face with the truth of its own character and the choices it had made during life. The very act of speaking these words of innocence served to purify the soul, burning away the last vestiges of earthly attachment and preparing it for the transformation that lay ahead. For those who passed this ultimate test, the journey continued through the 7th, 8th, and 9th hours of night, where they witnessed the gradual return of light and life as Ra's boat approached the eastern horizon. These were regions of increasing joy and illumination, where the blessed dead joined their voices to the hymns of praise that welcomed the returning sun. In the 10th and 11th hours, the soul entered the realm of preparation for rebirth, where the creative forces of the universe worked to fashion new forms of existence for both the sun god and the purified dead. This was a place of intense activity and transformation, where the very substance of reality was constantly being rewoven into new patterns of meaning and purpose. Finally, in the 12th hour, as dawn approached in the world of the living, the soul emerged from the duat transformed and renewed, no longer bound by the limitations of mortal existence, but free to participate in the eternal cycle of death and rebirth that governed all creation. Some would choose to return to earthly life in new forms, while others would join the company of the blessed dead who sailed forever with Ra across the heavens. This nightly journey was not just the fate of human souls, but the pattern that governed all existence for even Ra himself. The king of the gods had to pass through death each evening in order to be reborn each morning. The sun's daily cycle was thus a cosmic drama of renewal and hope, a promise that no matter how dark the night might become, dawn would always return, bringing with it new possibilities and new life. The ancient Egyptians found great comfort in this vision of the afterlife, for it meant that death was not a punishment or an arbitrary fate, but an integral part of a larger pattern that gave meaning to existence. The journey through the duat was difficult and sometimes terrifying, but it was also an adventure, an opportunity for growth and transformation that continued beyond the boundaries of mortal life. As the first light of dawn broke across the eastern horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose that seemed to echo the divine radiance of Ra himself, the ancient Egyptians would emerge from their homes to greet the returning sun with prayers of thanksgiving and joy. For them, each sunrise was not merely a natural phenomenon, but a victory celebration, a daily triumph of order over chaos, of life over death, of hope over despair. Ra, the great sun god, whose name means sun, in its most essential form, was understood to be both the physical sun that gives light and warmth to the world, and the spiritual principle that illuminates consciousness and drives away the darkness of ignorance and fear. Each morning, his golden boat would emerge from the duat, where he had spent the night battling the forces of chaos, and begin its majestic journey across the sky, bringing life and energy to all creation. The solar boat itself was a marvel to contemplate, crafted from imperishable materials and crewed by the gods themselves, each with their own essential role in maintaining the cosmic order. At the prow stood the goddess Mat, her ostrich feather held high as a symbol of the truth and justice that guided the sun's path. Beside her was Thoth, the eye-besetted god of wisdom, recording the deeds of gods and mortals in his eternal scrolls and using his vast knowledge to navigate the treacherous passages between the worlds. At the stern was Set, his earlier enmity with Horus transformed into loyal service to the greater good, his strength and courage now dedicated to protecting Ra from the greatest enemy of all creation, Apophis, the serpent of chaos, who lurked in the deepest parts of the underworld, waiting to devour the sun and plunge the world into eternal darkness. The journey across the sky was not without its perils, for Apophis was cunning as well as powerful, and each day he would devise new strategies to waylay the solar boat and prevent its successful completion of the celestial voyage. Sometimes he would disguise himself as a sandbank or a rocky outcrop, hoping to strand the boat in the desert of the sky. Sometimes he would summon storms and whirlwinds to buffet the vessel and throw it off course. But Ra was far from defenseless, for he possessed the most powerful weapon in all creation, the divine fire of his eye, which could reduce any enemy to ashes with a single glance. When Apophis reared up from the cosmic waters to strike at the solar boat, Ra would turn his terrible gaze upon the serpent, and the creature would be forced to retreat, wounded, but never permanently defeated. For chaos is a fundamental force that can be held at bay, but never completely destroyed. The daily victory over Apophis was thus not a final triumph, but an ongoing struggle that required constant vigilance and effort. This understanding gave the ancient Egyptians a profound appreciation for the preciousness of each day, for they knew that the light and warmth that made life possible were not automatic gifts, but the result of divine effort and sacrifice. At noon, when Ra reached the zenith of his journey, the sun god was at the height of his power, his light so brilliant that mortal eyes could not look directly upon him. This was the hour when his creative energy was most intense, when the life force that flowed from him reached every corner of creation, nurturing the growth of plants, warming the bodies of animals, and filling human hearts with the vitality needed for their daily labors. But even at his moment of greatest triumph, Ra was already beginning the descent toward evening, reminding all who witnessed his passage that even the mightiest powers in the universe are subject to the great cycles of change and renewal. As the afternoon progressed and shadows began to lengthen, the sun god would gradually transform from Ra the triumphant to Adamra the aged, his hair growing white, his step becoming slower, his voice taking on the gentle wisdom that comes with the approach of rest. As evening approached, Ra would reach the western horizon, where the sky goddess Nut waited to swallow him, beginning his journey through her body and through the underworld beyond. This daily death and rebirth of the sun became the template for all Egyptian understanding of the afterlife. For if even the greatest of the gods had to pass through death in order to achieve renewal, then surely this was the natural and proper pattern for all existence. The transformation of Ra from the vigorous young son of morning to the wise old son of evening, and then to the hidden son of midnight who battled chaos in the depths of the underworld, reflected the Egyptians' understanding that wisdom comes through experience, that power must be balanced with humility, and that even the gods must sometimes walk through darkness in order to appreciate the light. During the long hours of night, when Ra's boat traveled through the Duat, the people of Egypt would light lamps and torches, not just for practical illumination, but as acts of sympathetic magic designed to help the sun god in his struggle against the forces of darkness. They understood that they were not merely passive recipients of divine favor, but active participants in the cosmic drama, and that their prayers and rituals could actually influence the outcome of the nightly battle between order and chaos. In their temples, priests would maintain eternal flames that were never allowed to go out, symbols of the imperishable light that connects the earthly realm to the divine. These sacred fires were tended with elaborate ritual and ceremony, for they were understood to be earthly manifestations of Ra's own solar fire focal points, where the creative energy of the sun god could be concentrated and directed for the benefit of the community. The cult of Ra reached its highest development during the Old Kingdom, when the pharaohs began to identify themselves directly with the sun god, claiming to be his sons and heirs, ruling by his divine authority, and destined to join him in the solar boat after their earthly reigns had ended. The great pyramids of Giza were built not just as tombs, but as launching pads for the deceased. Pharaohs' souls, their precise alignment with the cardinal directions, and their pyramid shape, designed to channel solar energy and facilitate the king's transformation into a star. But Ra was not a distant, unapproachable deity for the Egyptians. Also understood him in his more intimate aspects as Ra Harakti, the falcon god, who could see all that transpired on earth from his lofty flight across the heavens, and as Atum-Ra, the creator god, who continued to maintain and sustain the world through his daily journey. In these forms, he was accessible to ordinary people who could pray to him for protection during their travels, for success in their endeavors, and for the simple blessing of another day of life. The hymns composed in Ra's honor revealed the deep affection and gratitude that the ancient Egyptians felt toward their solar deity. "Hail to you, Ra, when you rise," they would sing. "Hail to you, Ra, when you set. You rise, you shine, you are crowned king in the sky. You are the Lord of what the heaven encircles, of what the earth contains. You are the King of gods and men. All eyes behold your beauty when you appear at the beginning of each day." These were not mere words of flattery, but expressions of genuine wonder at the miracle of each sunrise, each return of light and warmth to a world that had passed through the darkness of night. For the ancient Egyptians, the sun was not just a ball of fire in the sky, but the visible manifestation of divine love and care, the daily proof that the universe was ultimately ordered by benevolent intelligence rather than blind chance. As Ra's boat completed its nightly journey and emerged once again from the underworld, bringing with it the promise of a new day, the eternal cycle would begin anew, carrying with it all the hopes and dreams of humanity, all the prayers for health and prosperity, all the gratitude for the gift of existence itself. And in this daily renewal, the ancient Egyptians found not just comfort and hope, but a profound sense of participation in the cosmic order that gave meaning and purpose to their lives. Yet, even as they celebrated the daily triumph of Ra over the forces of darkness, the ancient Egyptians never forgot that chaos was not simply an external enemy to be defeated, but an essential component of the cosmic balance that made creation possible. In their complex and nuanced theology, they reserved a special place for Set, the god who embodied the wild, destructive forces that could sweep away civilizations, but also clear the ground for new growth and development. Set was a paradox wrapped in divine flesh simultaneously, the enemy of order and its necessary complement, the force that challenged heroes and made their victories meaningful, the storm that destroyed, but also the storm that brought life-giving rain to the desert. To understand Set is to glimpse the sophisticated theological thinking that allowed the ancient Egyptians to embrace both light and shadow as equally valid aspects of divine truth. In his physical appearance, Set was as unsettling as his nature, depicted with the head of an animal that has never been definitively identified by modern scholars, but which the Egyptians called the Set animal, a creature with a long, curved snout, tall, pointed ears, and a forked tail that stood erect like a lightning rod. Some have suggested it was based on an extinct species of African wild dog, others that it was purely mythological, a composite creature designed to embody the strange and otherworldly nature of chaos itself. His skin was often shown as red, the color of the desert sand and the setting sun, the color of blood and fire, and all things that speak of power and danger. His eyes blazed with an inner fire that could be terrifying to behold, yet they also held a kind of wild wisdom, the knowledge that comes from standing at the edges of creation and seeing both its beauty and its fragility. Set's domain was the desert, that vast expanse of sand and rock that surrounded the fertile Nile Valley like an ocean of emptiness and silence. To the ancient Egyptians, the desert was not simply empty space, but a realm of profound spiritual significance, a place where the usual rules of civilized existence did not apply, and where one could encounter forces and beings that existed nowhere else in creation. It was in the desert that hermits and mystics went to seek enlightenment, stripping away the comfortable illusions of social existence and confronting the raw reality of their own souls. It was in the desert that the gods revealed themselves in their most primal forms, unmediated by the temples and rituals of organized religion. And it was in the desert that Set held court, surrounded by the spirits of storm and drought, of sandstorm and mirage, of all the forces that reminded humanity of its vulnerability and dependence on powers greater than itself. But Set was not merely a god of destruction, for the ancient Egyptians understood that destruction and creation are intimately linked, to aspects of a single cosmic process that must be allowed to operate freely if the universe is to remain vital and alive. The forest fire that seems to destroy actually clears away dead wood and allows new growth to flourish. The flood that devastates one year's crops deposits rich silt that will nourish the next year's harvest. The storm that terrifies also brings the rain that makes life possible. In the cosmic drama of Ra's nightly journey through the underworld, Set played the crucial role of defender, standing at the prow of the solar boat with his spear raised against Apophis, the serpent of ultimate chaos. Night after night, as the sun god's vessel made its perilous passage through the realm of the dead, Set would battle the great serpent, using his strength and ferocity to protect the light that gave life to the world. This transformation of Set from enemy to protector was not a contradiction in Egyptian thinking, but a profound insight into the nature of chaos itself. The same forces that could destroy when misdirected or uncontrolled could become powerful allies when properly channeled and focused. Set's violent nature, which had led him to murder Osiris, was exactly what was needed to combat the even greater violence of Apophis. The ancient Egyptians saw this principle at work in many aspects of their daily lives. The pharaoh, who was expected to embody the gentle wisdom of Osiris in times of peace, also had to be capable of the fierce decisiveness of Set when war threatened the kingdom. The priest, who maintained the rituals of order and harmony, also needed to understand the forces of chaos well enough to protect against them. The farmer, who worked with the orderly cycles of planting and harvest, also had to be prepared for the chaotic forces of flood and drought that could disrupt those cycles. Set's followers were often found among those who lived at the margins of Egyptian society. Soldiers and warriors, miners and metalworkers, desert traders and foreign merchants, all those whose work brought them into contact with the dangerous and unpredictable forces that lay beyond the ordered boundaries of the Nile Valley. They honored Set not because they were evil or destructive, but because they understood that someone had to be willing to confront chaos on its own terms, to master the wild forces that threatened civilization. The annual festivals dedicated to Set were among the most dramatic and emotionally intense in the Egyptian religious calendar, involving ritual combats, mock battles, and ceremonies designed to channel destructive impulses in constructive directions. Participants would don red clothing and animal masks, allowing themselves to tap into the primal energies that Set represented while remaining safely within the bounds of ritual and tradition. These festivals served a crucial psychological and social function, providing a sanctioned outlet for the aggressive and rebellious impulses that exist in every human heart. By acknowledging and honoring these aspects of human nature, rather than simply suppressing them, Egyptian society was able to maintain a remarkable degree of stability and order over thousands of years. The relationship between Set and his nephew, Horus, even after their great conflict had been resolved, remained complex and dynamic, a constant negotiation between the forces of order and chaos that kept both in proper balance. Horus needed Set to challenge him, to keep him alert and strong, just as Set needed Horus to provide a worthy opponent, someone against whom he could test his strength without destroying the very creation he helped to maintain. In the deepest teachings of Egyptian theology, some priests whispered that Set and Horus were not really enemies at all, but two aspects of a single divine principle, the creative tension that drives all existence forward through endless cycles of conflict and resolution, destruction and renewal, death and rebirth. Without Set, they taught, Horus would become complacent and weak. Without Horus, Set would become purely destructive and meaningless. This understanding of the necessity of chaos within order, of conflict within harmony, gave the ancient Egyptians a remarkably mature and sophisticated approach to the problem of evil. They did not pretend that suffering and destruction did not exist, nor did they dismiss them as illusions or mistakes. Instead, they found ways to incorporate these difficult realities into a larger vision of meaning and purpose that could sustain people through the darkest times. When sandstorms swept across the desert, burying caravan routes and threatening travelers with death, the people would pray not for Set to be defeated, but for his power to be properly directed, for his wildness to be channeled in ways that would ultimately serve the greater good. When political upheavals threatened the stability of the kingdom, wise counselors would invoke not just the wisdom of Thoth and the justice of Mat, but also the strength of Set, understanding that sometimes the old order had to be shaken or even destroyed before a new and better order could emerge. In their art and literature, the ancient Egyptians often depicted Set as a complex, even sympathetic figure, driven by genuine grievances and possessed of his own fierce code of honor. They understood that he was not evil in any simple sense, but rather the embodiment of necessary forces that, while difficult and sometimes painful, were essential to the ongoing vitality of creation. As the desert winds carried the scent of distant storms across the Nile Valley, and as the people of Egypt prepared their offerings and prayers for another night's journey of the sun through the underworld, they would remember that even in the darkness, even in the realm of chaos and uncertainty, the divine order was at work, weaving together all the threads of existence into a tapestry of meaning that was larger and more beautiful than any human mind could fully comprehend. The stories of the gods and their cosmic struggles would thus flow naturally into the everyday lives of the Egyptian people, for they understood that the same divine forces that shaped the heavens also moved through the temples and palaces, the workshops and fields, the homes and hearts of mortals who sought to live in harmony with the sacred order that governed all existence. In the great temples that rose like stone mountains from the desert floor, their walls covered with hieroglyphs that seemed to capture the very language of the gods. The ancient Egyptians created sacred spaces where the mythological became tangible, where the distant dramas of heaven played out in daily rituals that connected the human and divine realms in bonds of mutual responsibility and care. These temples were not mere buildings, but living entities, breathing with the rhythm of sacred ceremony, pulsing with the energy of divine presence, designed according to cosmic principles that made them earthly reflections of the celestial order. Each temple was understood to be the literal house of the god or goddess to whom it was dedicated, a place where the deity could dwell in comfort and splendor, while remaining accessible to the prayers and offerings of mortal worshippers. The pharaoh, who stood at the apex of this sacred hierarchy, was no ordinary king ruling by human authority alone, but the living embodiment of Horus, the son of Osiris, the chosen representative of Ra himself. In his person, the mythological became historical, the eternal became temporal, the divine became human, while never ceasing to be divine. Every act of royal governance was thus a religious ritual, every royal decree an expression of divine will, every royal appearance a theophany in which the gods made themselves visible to their people. When the pharaoh appeared in public, dressed in the regalia that connected him to the cosmic order, wearing the double crown that united upper and lower Egypt, as the gods had united heaven and earth, carrying the crook and flail that symbolized his role as shepherd and protector of his people, the crowds that gathered were not merely viewing a political leader, but witnessing the presence of divinity itself walking among them. The elaborate ceremonies of royal coronation were designed to effect an actual transformation, not just a symbolic one, in which the human prince died to his mortal nature and was reborn as a god-king possessed of divine knowledge and power, capable of maintaining the cosmic order throughout his realm. The priests who conducted these rituals understood that they were not merely performing theater, but participating in a cosmic drama that had real effects both in heaven and on earth. In the inner sanctuaries of the great temples, far from the eyes of common worshippers, the most sacred rituals were performed with a precision and attention to detail that would make modern scientists envious. Every word had to be pronounced correctly, every gesture executed with perfect accuracy, every offering prepared according to ancient formulas that had been handed down unchanged for centuries. For the priests understood that they were not just honoring the gods, but actually maintaining the stability of creation itself through their ritual actions. The daily temple service followed the pattern of Ra's solar journey, beginning before dawn with the opening of the sanctuary doors and the awakening of the goddess statue with incense and hymns. The morning ritual included the ceremonial washing and dressing of the divine image, the presentation of food offerings, and the recitation of prayers that were believed to provide the god with the sustenance needed for another day's work of maintaining cosmic order. At noon, when Ra reached the height of his power, the temple rituals reached their most elaborate and magnificent expression, with processions of priests carrying sacred objects, choruses singing hymns of praise, and clouds of incense rising like prayers made visible toward the painted ceiling that depicted the star-filled body of Nut arching protectively over the sacred space. In the evening, as Ra began his descent toward the western horizon, the temple rituals shifted to a more somber tone, preparing the god for his nightly journey through the underworld and asking for protection during the hours of darkness when chaos threatened to overwhelm order. The sanctuary doors would be sealed with elaborate ceremonies, ensuring that the divine presence remained safely contained within the sacred space until the next dawn brought renewal and the cycle began again. These daily rituals were not mere repetition, but living prayer that changed with the seasons, the phases of the moon, the flooding of the Nile, and the great festivals that marked the sacred calendar. The priests who performed them were not simply going through the motions, but participating in the ongoing creation of the world, using their knowledge of divine names and sacred formulas to weave the fabric of reality itself. The great festivals that punctuated the Egyptian year brought the temple rituals out into the public sphere, allowing ordinary people to participate directly in the mythological dramas that usually remained hidden within the sanctuary walls. During the Apep festival, the statue of Ammon would travel in solemn procession from Karnak to Luxor, reenacting the sacred marriage that renewed the fertility of the land and the divine authority of the pharaoh. The festival of Sokar involved elaborate processions through the necropolis, honoring the dead and renewing the connection between the living and those who had passed into the afterlife. The festival of the Tail celebrated the pharaoh's continued vitality and power, featuring ritual races and combat displays that symbolically renewed his divine energy and his ability to maintain order throughout the kingdom. During these festivals, the usually rigid boundaries between sacred and secular, divine and human, mythological and historical, would dissolve, and for a few precious days, the entire society would live within the mythological realm, playing out the eternal dramas of the gods with an intensity and conviction that transformed both participants and observers. The pharaoh's palace was designed as an earthly reflection of the divine court, with the king's daily routine following the pattern of Ra's solar journey and his royal appearances carefully orchestrated to reinforce his divine nature. When he held court, he sat upon a throne that was understood to be the earthly counterpart of the thrones occupied by Osiris in the underworld, and Ra in the solar boat, making his judgments not as a human arbitrator, but as the living voice of divine justice. The elaborate protocol that surrounded the pharaoh served not just to enhance his political authority, but to maintain the sacred boundary between the human and divine realms, while still allowing communication and interaction between them. Those who approached the king had to undergo ritual purification, speak in prescribed formulas, and conduct themselves according to ancient traditions that preserved the sacred character of the encounter. Even the pharaoh's private life was governed by mythological patterns, for his marriage was understood as a reenactment of the sacred unions between gods and goddesses. His children were potential vessels for divine incarnation, and his eventual death would be the beginning of his transformation into Osiris, the eternal king of the afterlife. The royal burial preparations, which often began during the pharaoh's lifetime, were perhaps the most elaborate and sophisticated religious rituals ever devised by human civilization, designed not just to preserve the king's body for eternity, but to facilitate his complete transformation into a god, capable of joining Ra in the solar boat and ruling alongside Osiris in the underworld. The great pyramids and elaborate tombs that housed these royal burials were not monuments to human vanity, but sacred machines designed to channel cosmic energies and facilitate the pharaoh's journey to divinity. Every architectural detail, from the precise orientation of the passages to the specific dimensions of the burial chamber, was calculated to harmonize with celestial movements and mythological patterns. In this way, the mythological world of the gods was not separate from the historical world of human events, but intimately interwoven with it, giving sacred meaning to political authority, transforming governance into worship, and ensuring that the eternal patterns of divine order would be reflected in the temporal arrangements of earthly society. As the great temples continued their eternal cycles of ritual and ceremony, as the pharaohs rose and fell while maintaining their divine connection, as the people of Egypt went about their daily lives within the embrace of this sacred order, the mythology that had begun with the emergence of Adam from the primeval waters continued to evolve and deepen, finding new expression in the stories and ceremonies dedicated to the goddesses who embodied the protective, nurturing, and transformative aspects of divine power. Among all the deities in the vast Egyptian pantheon, none touched the daily lives of ordinary people more directly or more intimately than the goddesses who embodied the protective and nurturing aspects of divine power. These were not distant, unapproachable figures dwelling in celestial isolation, but immediate presences who could be felt in the gentle touch of a mother's hand, the fierce protection of a lioness defending her cubs, the wise counsel of an elder woman, and the irresistible power of love itself. Isis, whose story of devotion and resurrection had already woven itself through the central myth of Egyptian religion, was perhaps the most beloved of all the goddesses, for she represented everything that was most cherished in the Egyptian understanding of feminine power. She was the ideal wife, whose love for Osiris transcended even death itself. She was the perfect mother, who protected Horus through all dangers and taught him the skills he would need to reclaim his rightful throne. She was the supreme magician, whose knowledge of secret names and powerful spells could heal the sick, raise the dead, and compel even the gods themselves to do her bidding. But Isis was more than just a combination of roles and attributes. She was the embodiment of the principle that love, when combined with wisdom and determination, could overcome any obstacle and transform any tragedy into triumph. Her cult spread far beyond Egypt, eventually reaching every corner of the Roman Empire, because her story spoke to universal human experiences of loss and hope, grief, and healing, the search for meaning in the face of suffering. In her temples, which could be found in every major city, from Alexandria to Rome, from Athens to London, devotees would come seeking not just divine favor, but practical guidance for the challenges of daily life. Isis was the goddess you approached when your child was sick, when your husband was unfaithful, when you were facing financial ruin or legal troubles, when you needed the strength to endure whatever life had thrown at you. Her priests and priestesses were trained not just in the elaborate rituals of formal worship, but in the healing arts, in counseling and guidance, in the interpretation of dreams and omens, in all the practical skills that people needed to navigate the complexities of existence. The Temple of Isis was part religious sanctuary, part hospital, part counseling center, and part school, a place where the divine wisdom was made available to anyone who sought it with sincere heart. The annual festival of Isis, called the Isha, reenacted the entire drama of her search for Osiris, his death and resurrection, and the birth and protection of Horus. For several days, the participants would live within the mythological narrative, experiencing firsthand the goddess's grief, determination, triumph, and joy. These were not mere theatrical performances, but transformative spiritual experiences that allowed ordinary people to tap into the same divine energies that had enabled Isis to overcome death itself. Alongside Isis, though different in character and function, stood Hathor, the golden goddess whose domain encompassed love, music, dance, fertility, and joy. If Isis represented the serious, maternal aspect of feminine divinity, Hathor embodied its celebratory, sensual, life-affirming dimension. She was the goddess of festivals and feasts, of weddings and births, of all the occasions when life revealed its fundamental goodness and beauty. Hathor was often depicted as a cow, the animal that best symbolized her nurturing nature, or as a woman with cow's ears and horns, emphasizing her connection to the life-giving power of the earth. Her temples were places of music and dancing, where the boundaries between sacred and secular celebration dissolved in joyful worship that honored the goddess through the full expression of human vitality and creativity. The priests of Hathor were often musicians and dancers, themselves understanding that their goddess was best honored not through solemn ritual alone, but through the kind of exuberant celebration that lifts the human spirit and connects it to the divine joy that underlies all creation. Her festivals were famous throughout Egypt for their beauty and splendor, featuring elaborate processions, dramatic performances, and communal feasts that could last for days. But Hathor also had a darker aspect, for the same maternal love that nurtured life could become terrifyingly fierce when that life was threatened. In her form as the Eye of Ra, she could transform into Sekhmet, the lioness goddess whose rage could destroy entire armies and whose breath could bring plague and pestilence to those who violated the cosmic order. The myth of Sekhmet's rampage tells of a time when humanity had grown rebellious and disrespectful toward the gods, prompting Ra to send his divine eye to punish the offenders. But once unleashed, Sekhmet's fury proved almost impossible to control, and she began slaughtering not just the guilty, but the innocent as well, threatening to destroy all human life on Earth. Only through a clever stratagem involving beer dyed red to look like blood was Ra able to intoxicate Sekhmet and calm her rage, transforming her back into the gentle Hathor. This myth served as a powerful reminder that divine power, even in its most nurturing aspects, demands respect and proper conduct, and that the violation of sacred order can unleash forces that are difficult to contain once they have been set in motion. Sekhmet, in her own right, was worshipped as the goddess of healing and medicine, for the same power that could bring disease could also cure it. And her priests were among the most skilled physicians in ancient Egypt. Her temples served as medical centers where both physical and spiritual healing were practiced. Understanding that true health required harmony between the human soul and the divine order that governed all existence, the goddess Bastet represented yet another aspect of feminine divinity, embodying the protective, domestic side of feline nature rather than its wild, dangerous aspect. While Sekhmet was the lioness who could destroy armies, Bastet was the house cat who protected the home from mice and serpents, who brought comfort and companionship to human families, who watched over children and pregnant women with gentle vigilance. Bastet's cult center at Bubastis was famous for its annual festival, which Herodotus described as the most elaborate and joyful celebration in all of Egypt, attracting hundreds of thousands of pilgrims who would travel to the city by boat, singing and dancing and playing music throughout the journey. The festival itself featured processions of sacred cats, elaborate feasts, and communal celebrations that honored the goddess through the expression of simple human happiness and contentment. The worship of Bastet reflected the Egyptian understanding that the divine could be found not just in the grand cosmic dramas played out by the great gods, but in the small, everyday experiences of comfort, protection, and domestic harmony that made life worth living. She was the goddess of the hearthside and the nursery, of the garden and the granary, of all the quiet places where love and care created small sanctuaries of peace and security. But perhaps the most fundamental of all the goddesses was Mat, whose very name means truth, and who embodied the principle of cosmic order that made all existence possible. She was not just a goddess to be worshipped, but a principle to be lived, a standard by which all actions and decisions could be measured, the foundation upon which the entire Egyptian understanding of morality and justice was built. Mat was depicted as a woman wearing a single ostrich feather on her head, and this feather became one of the most important symbols in Egyptian religion, representing the perfect balance and harmony that should govern both individual conduct and cosmic order. It was against this feather that the hearts of the dead were weighed in the underworld, and it was according to Mat's principles that pharaohs were expected to rule and judges to render their decisions. The concept of Mat was so central to Egyptian thinking that it pervaded every aspect of their civilization, from the most elaborate royal ceremonies to the simplest daily interactions between neighbors. To live according to Mat meant to speak truthfully, to deal fairly with others, to respect the natural order, to honor the gods, to care for the weak and vulnerable, and to maintain the delicate balance between all the opposing forces that kept the world stable and harmonious. Mat was not an abstract philosophical principle, but a living goddess who actively participated in the governance of the universe, standing at the prow of Ra's solar boat to guide its journey across the sky, presiding over the judgment of the dead and inspiring pharaohs and commoners alike to choose justice over personal advantage, truth over comfortable lies, harmony over destructive conflict. The 42 principles of Mat, which formed the basis of the negative confession that souls had to recite in the afterlife, provided a comprehensive moral code that covered every aspect of human behavior, from the most serious crimes to the smallest social transgressions. These were not arbitrary rules imposed by divine decree, but practical guidelines for maintaining the kind of social harmony that allowed civilization to flourish and individuals to achieve their highest potential. Together, these goddesses represented the full spectrum of feminine divine power, from the nurturing love of Isis to the fierce protection of Sekhmet, from the joyful celebration of Hathor to the quiet comfort of Bastet, from the cosmic justice of Mat to the myriad other goddesses who governed specific aspects of life and death, creation and destruction, order and renewal. Their worship was not segregated from daily life, but woven into the very fabric of Egyptian society, influencing everything from child-rearing practices to legal proceedings, from medical treatment to artistic creation, from agricultural techniques to architectural design. The goddesses were not distant figures to be approached only in times of crisis, but constant companions who walked alongside humanity through all the experiences that make up a human life. In their temples and shrines, in the amulets worn for protection, in the prayers whispered at bedtime and the hymns sung at dawn, in the stories told to children and the wisdom passed down from grandmother to granddaughter, the power and presence of the goddesses remained a living reality that connected each individual to the vast, nurturing embrace of the divine feminine that held all creation in its loving care. As the worship of these powerful goddesses flowed through the daily lives of the Egyptian people, connecting them to divine sources of strength and wisdom, their thoughts naturally turned toward the great mystery that awaited every soul at the end of its earthly journey, the passage beyond death into the eternal realm where the limitations of mortal existence would be transcended and the true nature of the divine would be revealed in all its glory. For the ancient Egyptians, death was not an ending but a transformation, not a wall but a doorway, not a defeat but a graduation into a higher form of existence where the soul would finally be free to explore the full extent of its divine nature. Their elaborate beliefs about the afterlife were not born from fear of mortality, but from a profound confidence that consciousness itself was imperishable, that the essential self that thought and loved and dreamed was made of the same eternal substance as the gods themselves. The journey beyond death began, they believed, with the soul's emergence from the physical body, like a butterfly emerging from its chrysalis or a bird breaking free from its shell. This newly liberated consciousness would find itself in a realm that was simultaneously familiar and utterly transformed, where the landscape of Egypt existed in an idealized, perfected form that reflected the eternal patterns underlying material reality. In this blessed realm, the Nile flowed with waters of liquid light, the fields were always green and fertile, the harvests never failed, and the sun never ceased to shine with gentle warmth that nourished without burning. This was the field of reeds, the Egyptian equivalent of paradise, where souls who had lived according to Mat could dwell in peace and contentment for as long as they desired. But the ancient Egyptians understood that even paradise might eventually become limiting for a consciousness that was destined for ever greater expansion and development. Beyond the field of reeds lay the possibility of even more exalted forms of existence, where the soul could choose to become one with the cosmic forces, themselves joining the crew of Ra's solar boat, or taking its place among the imperishable stars that wheeled eternally across the heavens. The circumpolar stars, which never disappeared below the horizon, but rotated endlessly around the celestial pole, were seen as the most blessed of all souls, those who had achieved such perfect harmony with the cosmic order that they had become permanent features of the divine architecture. These stellar souls served as guides and protectors for those still making their way through the various stages of spiritual development. Their steady light, a constant reminder that transcendence was possible for all who sought it with sufficient dedication and purity of heart. The constellation that we call Orion was identified with Osiris himself, the king of the afterlife, who had shown by his own example that death could be transformed into a doorway to divinity. Near him in the sky was Sirius, the brightest star visible from Egypt, which was sacred to Isis, and whose annual heliacal rising marked the beginning of the Nile flood, connecting the cycles of heaven and earth in a pattern of renewal that promised eternal return and regeneration. For those souls who chose to join the company of the stars, existence became a matter of pure consciousness, unencumbered by physical form, but enriched by direct participation in the cosmic processes that governed all creation. These stellar souls could witness the birth and death of worlds, the evolution of species, the rise and fall of civilizations, all from the perspective of eternity that revealed the deeper patterns and purposes underlying apparent chaos and change. But not all souls were called to such exalted destinies, and the Egyptian teachings made room for many different paths of development and fulfillment in the afterlife. Some souls chose to remain in the field of reeds, finding perfect contentment in an existence that combined the best aspects of earthly life with the peace and security that came from being forever beyond the reach of suffering and loss. Others chose to return to earthly existence in new incarnations, bringing with them the wisdom and spiritual development they had gained in the afterlife, contributing to the ongoing evolution of human consciousness and the gradual perfection of material creation. The doctrine of reincarnation was not as prominent in Egyptian religion as it would later become in other cultures, but it was present as one option among many for souls seeking continued growth and experience. Still others chose to serve as guides and guardians for those still living, becoming the protective spirits that could be invoked in times of need. The wise ancestors whose counsel could be sought through dreams and divination. The loving presences that watched over families and communities with invisible but very real care and protection. The ancient Egyptians developed elaborate practices for maintaining communication with these departed souls, understanding that death did not sever the bonds of love and family but transformed them into something even more profound and enduring. The cult of the ancestors was central to Egyptian spirituality, with families maintaining shrines in their homes where they could offer food and prayers to deceased relatives, seeking their guidance and blessing for important decisions. The festival of the beautiful Feast of the Valley was perhaps the most important of these ancestral celebrations, when the entire community would visit the tombs of their departed loved ones, bringing elaborate feasts to share with the dead and creating a joyful atmosphere of reunion and remembrance that affirmed the continuing presence and influence of those who had passed beyond the veil. These celebrations were not somber affairs, but joyous festivals that celebrated the triumph of consciousness over mortality, the victory of love over separation, the promise that all who had been touched by divine grace would eventually be reunited in the eternal realm, where suffering and loss were forever banished. The tombs themselves were designed not as final resting places, but as eternal homes where the deceased could continue to exist in comfort and dignity, surrounded by all the things they had loved in life, but now perfected and made imperishable. The elaborate burial goods, the detailed wall paintings depicting scenes of daily life and spiritual journey, the carefully preserved bodies and the magical texts inscribed on tomb walls all served to create an environment where the soul could feel at home while making its gradual transition to higher forms of existence. The pyramid texts, coffin texts, and books of the dead that have survived from ancient Egypt provide detailed maps of the afterlife journey, complete with spells and formulas for overcoming obstacles, passwords for getting past guardians, and descriptions of the various regions and beings that the soul would encounter. These were not works of fantasy, but practical guidebooks based on thousands of years of accumulated wisdom about the nature of consciousness and its destiny beyond physical death. Reading these ancient texts today, one is struck by their combination of precise, practical detail and soaring spiritual vision. Their matter-of-fact acceptance of the reality of life after death, combined with profound insights into the nature of consciousness, identity, and the ultimate purpose of existence. They reveal a civilization that had developed perhaps the most sophisticated and comprehensive understanding of death and the afterlife that humanity has ever achieved. But perhaps most remarkable of all was the ancient Egyptian understanding that the afterlife was not a static reward or punishment, but a continuation of the same process of growth and development that had begun in earthly life. The soul that entered the realm beyond death was not frozen in the state it had achieved at the moment of passing, but continued to evolve, to learn, to expand its understanding and capabilities, to move ever closer to complete union with the divine source from which it had originally emerged. This vision of eternal progression, of consciousness as an imperishable principle that could transcend any limitation and achieve any height of development, gave the ancient Egyptians a unique perspective on the meaning and purpose of existence that sustained them through thousands of years of history, through times of prosperity and periods of crisis, through the rise and fall of dynasties and the coming of foreign conquerors. Their confidence in the ultimate destiny of consciousness was so complete that they could face death not with fear or despair, but with anticipation and even eagerness, knowing that they were about to embark on the greatest adventure possible, the exploration of realities so vast and magnificent that earthly language could only hint at their glory. As the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, as the Nile continued its ancient rhythm of flood and recession, as generation after generation of Egyptians lived and died secure in their understanding of consciousness as an imperishable gift from the gods, the great mythological system that had begun with Adam's emergence from the primeval waters continued to evolve and adapt, finding new expression in changing times while maintaining its essential core of wisdom about the nature of existence and humanity's place within the cosmic order. The mythology that had sustained Egypt through the ages of the pharaohs did not disappear with the coming of foreign rulers and new religions, but flowed like the Nile itself into new channels, carrying its essential wisdom into new cultures and civilizations, where it would continue to nourish human understanding of the divine mysteries that govern existence. When Alexander the Great conquered Egypt in 332 BCE, he did not come as a destroyer of the ancient wisdom, but as a student eager to learn from the priests and scholars who had preserved the mythological traditions for millennia. The great library of Alexandria, which he founded, became a meeting place where Egyptian mythology encountered Greek philosophy, Persian mysticism, and Jewish monotheism, creating new synthetic forms of spiritual understanding that would influence the development of Christianity, Islam, and the Western esoteric traditions. The goddess Isis, in particular, found new life in the Greco-Roman world, where her cult spread to every corner of the empire and attracted devotees from all social classes and ethnic backgrounds. Her temples in Rome were as magnificent as any in Egypt, and her festivals drew crowds that rivaled those of the traditional Roman gods. The appeal of Isis lay not just in her specific mythological identity, but in her embodiment of universal principles of love, wisdom, and transcendence that spoke to the deepest needs of the human soul. The influence of Egyptian mythology can be traced through the development of Gnostic Christianity, where the figure of Sophia, the divine wisdom, bears striking resemblances to Isis, and where the journey of the soul through the afterlife follows patterns first mapped out in the Egyptian books of the dead. The Hermetic traditions that flourished in late antiquity and influenced the development of Western alchemy and magic were explicitly based on the teachings attributed to Thoth, the Egyptian god of wisdom, who was identified with the Greek Hermes and gave his name to the Hermetic arts, even as Christianity became the dominant religion of the Mediterranean world. Egyptian mythological motifs continued to influence Christian art, theology, and mysticism. The image of Isis nursing the infant Horus provided a prototype for depictions of the Virgin Mary and the Christ child. the concept of divine judgment after death, with the weighing of souls and the possibility of eternal punishment or reward, was deeply influenced by Egyptian beliefs about the afterlife. The monastic movement that began in the Egyptian desert drew on ancient Egyptian traditions of hermitage and spiritual discipline. And the Christian mystics who sought union with God through contemplation and asceticism followed paths that had been pioneered thousands of years earlier by Egyptian priests and devotees seeking communion with their deities. During the Islamic conquest of Egypt, the ancient mythology underwent another transformation, as Islamic scholars and mystics found in the Egyptian wisdom traditions insights that complemented and enriched their own understanding of divine reality. The figure of Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great Hermes, who combined the attributes of the Egyptian Thoth with Greek and Islamic wisdom, became a central figure in Islamic alchemy and philosophy. The great Islamic scholars of medieval Egypt, such as Ibn Arabi and Al-Ghazali, drew on Egyptian mythological concepts in their development of Sufi mysticism and Islamic theology, finding in the ancient stories metaphors and symbols that could illuminate the deepest mysteries of spiritual experience and divine reality. When Egypt came under Ottoman rule, and later when it encountered the modern Western world through Napoleon's expedition and subsequent European influence, the ancient mythology once again proved its remarkable adaptability, inspiring new movements of spiritual and intellectual revival that sought to reclaim the wisdom of the pharaohs for contemporary use. The French scholars who accompanied Napoleon were astounded by the sophistication and depth of the mythological system they encountered in the temples and tombs of Egypt, and their publications introduced Egyptian mythology to a European audience hungry for alternatives to conventional religious and philosophical thinking. The decipherment of hieroglyphics by Jean-François Champollion opened up the vast library of Egyptian mythological texts to modern scholarship, revealing the full complexity and richness of a tradition that had been only dimly understood through Greek and Roman sources. The 19th and 20th centuries saw a remarkable revival of interest in Egyptian mythology, as scholars, artists, writers, and spiritual seekers found in the ancient wisdom traditions resources for addressing the challenges and opportunities of the modern world. The depth psychology of Carl Jung drew heavily on Egyptian mythological symbols and concepts, particularly the idea of individuation as a process of spiritual transformation, analogous to the journey of the soul through the afterlife. Modern archaeological discoveries, from the tomb of Tutankhamun to the Gnostic Gospels found at Nag Hammadi, have continued to reveal new dimensions of Egyptian mythological thinking, showing how profoundly these ancient stories shaped not only Egyptian civilization, but the entire development of human spirituality and consciousness. Today, as we face global challenges that require wisdom traditions capable of addressing the deepest questions about human nature, our relationship to the natural world, and our ultimate destiny as conscious beings, the mythology of ancient Egypt continues to offer insights and inspiration that remain as relevant and powerful as they were 5,000 years ago. The vision of consciousness as imperishable, of death as transformation rather than ending, of the universe as a living whole governed by intelligence and love rather than blind chance, of human beings as participants in a cosmic drama of meaning and purpose. These core insights of Egyptian mythology speak to contemporary concerns about the nature of consciousness, the possibility of life after death, the relationship between science and spirituality, and the ultimate meaning of existence. The ecological wisdom embedded in Egyptian mythology, with its understanding of the interconnectedness of all life and the importance of maintaining balance between opposing forces, offers guidance for addressing the environmental crises that threaten our planet. The Egyptian concept of Mat, with its emphasis on truth, justice, and cosmic order, provides a foundation for developing ethical frameworks adequate to the complexities of global civilization. The Egyptian understanding of the divine as simultaneously transcendent and immanent, as cosmic force and personal presence, as unity that manifests through diversity, offers resources for bridging the gap between scientific and religious worldviews, between rational inquiry and spiritual experience, between individual fulfillment and social responsibility. As we stand at the threshold of new ages of discovery and development, as we prepare to explore new frontiers of consciousness and reality, as we seek wisdom traditions that can guide us through the challenges and opportunities ahead, the mythology of ancient Egypt remains a living source of insight and inspiration, a testament to the human capacity for creating meaning and beauty in the face of mystery and uncertainty. The Nile still flows as it did in the time of the pharaohs, carrying its life-giving waters from the heart of Africa to the Mediterranean Sea, still rising and falling in the ancient rhythm that marked the passage of seasons and the renewal of life. The stars still wheel overhead in their eternal patterns, still marking the hours of night and the cycles of celestial time, still calling to human consciousness with their promise of transcendence and eternal beauty. In the museums of the world, the golden masks and painted coffins, the carved reliefs and papyrus texts, the mummies and amulets and sacred vessels continue to speak across the millennia, carrying their message of hope and wisdom, their testimony to the indestructible nature of consciousness and the ultimate triumph of love over death, of meaning over chaos, of light over darkness. And in the depths of the human heart, where the eternal questions about identity and destiny, love and loss, purpose and fulfillment continue to arise with each new generation, the mythology of ancient Egypt offers its gentle but persistent whisper of encouragement. You are more than you appear to be. Your consciousness is a fragment of eternal light. Your journey through existence has meaning and purpose beyond anything you can imagine, and the love that created you will never abandon you to meaninglessness or despair. In the end, perhaps this is the greatest gift that Egyptian mythology offers to our contemporary world, not a set of beliefs to be accepted uncritically, but a vision of possibility that can inspire each individual to embark on their own journey of discovery, to explore the depths of their own consciousness, to seek their own connection to the divine forces that govern existence, and to find their own way of participating in the eternal drama of creation, preservation, and transformation that continues to unfold in every moment, in every heart, in every dream of transcendence, and every act of love. As the ancient prayer to Ra proclaimed, "You rise, you shine, you are crowned king in the sky. You are the Lord of what the heaven encircles, of what the earth contains." And in that rising and shining, in that eternal coronation of consciousness over chaos, of light over darkness, of hope over despair, the mythology of ancient Egypt continues to live and breathe, and offer its timeless wisdom to all who have ears to hear and hearts to understand.